Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you to this pavilion for hosting us today for this session. And this session is on unlocking the green economy through carbon capture, utilization, and storage, emerging global markets. So I'm Olivia Powis, Chief Exec of the Carbon Capture and Storage Association, and I'm joined here by our panel. We have Brianne O'Reilly, who's COO of the International CCS Knowledge Center, Pavan Chilyukiri, Managing Director of the Middle East Energex Partners, and Johan Niedling, CEO of Tree Associates. So this event is really going to look at some of the positive developments we've had of CCUS over the past 18 months, with a number of projects reaching financial close in Europe and in particularly in the UK. And we're going to explore some of this experience and how we've managed to get to these stages and how we can continue to develop this market and then learn the lessons for emerging markets. So if I just start with a little bit of an overview in terms of what's happened in the UK, we have taken 5 projects to final investment decision over the last year. So this is 2 transport and storage infrastructure projects, one in the northeast and one in the northwest of the UK. And both of those have been able to move forward and take final investment decision. And then there are 3 capture projects that have been able to take final investment decision and will connect to that infrastructure, to the pipeline and store. And this is Net Zero Teesside, which is a gas power plant that is a new build that will connect to the East Coast cluster. And on the West Coast, there is a new energy from waste plant, Protos, energy from waste plant with carbon capture, and also a cement plant, so Heidelberg Cement in Padeswood. And so these are all projects that we've been working on for a number of years, developing the business models, developing the regulation to drive this industry forward. And so I think we can talk about some of the learnings and the processes that we've got to get to this stage and enable these projects and markets to move forward, both in terms of how we can deploy next projects and industry in the UK and in Europe, but also then how we can transfer some of that experience and knowledge to bring CCUS at scale in emerging markets. So if I might now pass on to Brianne, if you can give us a little bit of a background and an overview on global progress and projects underway from your perspective from the CCS Knowledge Center.
I'll use this one. According to GCCSI's status report this year, a record number of projects have advanced. We have 77 operating CCUS projects with 47 under construction. I'm going to take a minute to talk about what we have going on in the Americas. So in Canada, where I'm from, we have 6 operating capture facilities, 5 capture facilities under construction, and 37 planned capture facilities. We also have the largest CO2 pipeline at over 200 kilometers and up nearly 15 million tons per year capacity. We also have 4 other pipelines under development. From the storage side, we have 4 dedicated storage sites, 4 enhanced oil recovery sites, and 6 new dedicated storage sites under development and 30 in various stages of evaluation. So we've seen significant progress in Canada. In the US, we've also seen significant progress due to supportive taxes. They recently made enhancements to 45Q to increase the EOR values. We have seen some delays, though, in the states lately due to permit approvals, which are actually quicker in states with primacy than if they have to go through the federal government, and some cuts to DOE funding, which has really kind of slowed some of the momentum that's happening there. In Brazil, we are our lovely host country. They are leading the way for South America, developing the regulatory framework to support CCS deployment. Overall, we see a lot of projects proceeding that have lower costs, so ethanol plants, some of those easier to capture facilities, and then countries that have the right balance of incentives and a pathway to transport and storage. So that's where we see the most activity happening on this side of things. Recently in China, though, they advanced a project from FID to fully operational in 18 months. And I think that they will have some good learnings to share from a cost advantage perspective, as they are capturing CO2 at under $40 a ton.
Thank you very much, Brianne. Certainly some lessons there. If we could deploy our projects in 18 months at $40 a ton, I think that would. But obviously, a very different scenario and regulatory system surrounding that. But nonetheless, there will be lessons there. Pavan, could I come to you next, please, to give us a little bit of your views on key global markets for CCUS? So we've heard from Brianne on the States, but perhaps your focus on the Middle East as well.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. So let me start with maybe on the hard to abate and then go to the regional perspectives. Look, when it comes to hard to abate, what we are noticing in the cement industry, Heidelberg has taken has started up and is producing net zero cement, and they're actually marketing the net zero cement as well. So that's a great start for the industry. They've also taken an FID on Peterswood in UK, and they've received 3 EU Innovation Fund awards this year. As a matter of fact, when you look at the EU, the major awards, out of the 10 that has awarded, 5 went to cement companies, and I think 8 or 9 have a CCUS angle into it. So CCUS is the center of it seems like the EU funding strategy. When it comes to my previous employer, we had committed 2 billion Swiss francs before 2030 into CCUS investments, and secured 1 billion from EU for public funding for these projects. That would unlock 5 MTPA of CCUS capacity to produce 8 MTPA of net zero cement by 2030. So that's a huge number of projects. And overall, I think Holcim has received 8, if I recall correctly, and Heidelberg 5 EU Innovation Awards. So it's a significant amount of funding going in, because there is a business case for a net zero cement in Europe at this moment. So I think that is what is driving. But outside of Europe, you also see the 10 MTPA CCUS project in Saudi is up for FID. So that will be a great addition to the capacities. And Qatar has awarded an EPC for 4.1 MTPA investment. So that's a lot of good momentum out there inside and outside of Europe. And of course, cement, in Europe, cement is leading, and outside it's oil and gas, and blue molecules are leading.
Thank you. And Johan, if we now come to you and your views and experience in deploying CCUS at scale in different countries to maximize the opportunities and implementing business models there. If I can hold the mic very close, and then it gets.
Thank you, Olivia. That's a really good question. So I think we've heard that in developed economies, like we're making great strides in implementation for CCUS. What we've been focusing on is in emerging markets and finding those opportunities where we can support industrial emitters to find alternative routes to decarbonization, specifically focusing on carbon capture. What we've noticed is in those territories, it's the technology itself isn't the bottleneck anymore. Like we've got deployments commercial deployments that are doing the thing, and like there's been significant public investment in developed economies all the way from TRL9 down to TRL1. So I don't see that so much as the issue anymore. I think like in those territories, it's now become about finding the correct business models and economic models that are context sensitive and economically sensitive to those territories to make those investments make sense. So if we look at, for instance, if we look at what's happening in Ukraine, there's significant interest in CCUS. However, one of the key things we've noticed is the demand signal through the pricing of the CO2. So the local price for CO2 is like $2 a ton, right? Like we can't, as a technology provider, we can't compete with that. So it needs to, there needs to be a framework where we put a proper price signal on the CO2 in those territories, because it's easy outside of, let's say, CBAM to have your own local situation, and it works locally, but like in the context of globally for technology providers like us, it doesn't make sense. And I think like the positive developments that's happening there with EU ascension on the horizon and CBAM happening, we're seeing more and more of those territories adopting a more realistic carbon price, so that when we come and look at technology implementation, we're not calculating on $2 a ton. We're looking at something much more realistic in terms of what the cost of capture is in those territories.
We'll come back to that point, because I think Ukraine is an interesting example, and obviously there's additional outside help in terms of how you drive those markets, but definitely one that we can learn from. I think, Pavan, I just wanted to come back to you initially in terms of, so, you said there is a market for low carbon cement in Europe. How certain can we be of that market? What's driving it, and what is driving industry to invest in CCUS?
So, if you look at the current low carbon market, I think the companies are already selling 20 to 30% of the portfolio as low carbon, and that is anywhere between 30 to 50% lower carbon cement and concrete mixtures. They're getting that from alternative cementitious materials and alternative fuels, or recycled cement and concrete. So they are achieving that 20 to 30 to 50% carbon reduction, and they're already charging that as a branded product and charging a green premium. Not a whole significant amount of money, but there's still a feasible amount of green premium on that lower carbon cement. And we believe that there's a market for, if you have a near zero or net zero, that the green premium is going to be there and it will be higher. And what we've been hearing is that Heidelberg, who is producing net zero cement now, they sold out until 2026 end with a very significant green premium. So there's a market appetite out there, because the cost increase in the cement does not equate to a really high increase in the building cost. So that's what is driving. But at the same time, it's not just the green premium that is driving the investments into CCUS in the cement. It's free allocation reduction and public funding, and cement is blessed because it has alternative fuels, which brings in biogenic CO2. When you store it, you generate CDRs, and that are attractive in the voluntary market. So in addition, all the public funding that we have been receiving, so all these four levers of ETS avoidance, public funding, green premium, and CDR are making projects resilient and robust, and that is what the boards want. It's not just, if your project is resilient on only one value driver, then your project may not be resilient if things change significantly. So I think that is what the reason why the boards of the cement companies are more interested in taking that taking the next steps. And of course, there's a lot of work needs to be done, because ETS is a fluctuating mechanism, and it was at 100 euros in Feb 2024, and now it's at like 670 or something today. So how can we predict what the ETS price is going to be 15 years ahead? Because all the costs are more or less fixed, because the T&S contracts are take or pay, capex is sunk. So, and if you end up investing in a cement net zero cement plant, your cost base increases from 40 euros to 150 or 200 euros without any flexibility on that reduction in the cost, because most of the cost is fixed for the next 20 years.
Yeah. And of those levers, which do you think is the most, which is the biggest driver in terms of driving those markets?
I think public capital really helps because it reduces some of the net capex that you need to go in upon which you need to earn your return. That's an important one, and that also de-risks as well. But the second one is the ETS. It plays a huge role on the business case, but I cannot minimize the impact the CDRs have because if we have 20% CDR and then we sell it at 200 and ETS is only 150 or 100, so it's over proportionate value addition on the from the CDRs, and these are secure kind of revenues because we do not cement industry does not use biomass, they use bio waste, which is from municipal solid waste, sewage sludge, and those kind of elements, which are a secure supply because of the urbanization.
And I mean, if we come back to you, Johan, in terms of driving that market, so if you're talking about markets like Ukraine, who's going through a massive rebuilding program, and it makes sense to be using low carbon products, but the green premium that Pavan talked about, that there is a demand for that from Brevik in Norway. But surely, what is the market that's being able to drive it forward in Ukraine? Because it's presumably not a demand for a green premium product.
Absolutely no, absolutely not. And I think that's a very particular case in terms of Ukraine's a really particular case in terms of the rebuilding effort, and all of the things that would make the economics stack up in terms of using green technologies and that, and like a key part of that obviously is international or governmental intervention and support in terms of making those sorts of things happen. So I can talk a little bit about the project we're starting there in December. Is supported, like we're working with a cement manufacturer in Ukraine. Their current emissions are around 2.5 million tons a year. They're one of Ukraine's biggest cement producers, but at the moment, a lot of their exports are going into Poland. So whilst they're keeping up production, they're exporting into Poland and like coming up against the CBAM challenge there from next year. But then when the rebuild effort starts locally, there needs to be a solution for all of those emissions. Otherwise, we're going to lock in decades of CO2 emissions just on a rebuild effort. So we're very grateful to be supported by like the British Development Bank and Innovate Ukraine to bring that project to life through funding, essentially through government funding and support, not just for UK businesses, but also for businesses on the ground trying to decarbonize.
Yeah. And I guess for other emerging markets, do you see a similar pattern to move forward to at least get the initial projects off the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we look at, so I can only speak of the territories we've spoken to. So we're looking at India, South Africa, Ukraine, Nigeria, those sorts of territories. Whilst they're not going to be first movers in developing these technologies, they are very, very much watching what's happening and following very closely the developments that are happening all across the world. They're very well educated on what technologies are available, but they also understand the local context of making that technology work in that territory. So for instance, in India, one of the companies we're speaking to outside China in the world, top 3 for cement, steel, aluminium, and they're very much keeping a very close look at the technologies that's happening, but it's sort of more of a let's see how it plays out before we make the investment decision. And I think that's a really key thing, and I want to draw sort of like a parallel between how we saw earlier technologies like telecommunications develop in developed economies where we had the huge infrastructure investment, everybody got a copper line to their territory or to their house, and then if you look at what happened in the emerging markets, they went straight to cellular, which represents a cluster, so it's one to many. And I think if we take a similar approach in CCUS, we apply the learnings from actually if we set up a cluster with shared infrastructure in terms of like the U or the S in CCUS, it starts to make significantly more sense than trying to get a single project off the ground from scratch.
Yeah, and indeed, I suppose a cluster approach is one that we've looked to deploy in the UK, but still, I think it's how do we move from nothing at the moment in many emerging markets to actually building this wide scale industry. But Brianne, perhaps we come to you again. Pavan, you mentioned CDRs and a critical role they play, but Brianne. Perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about your experience in terms of the role of CDR projects in driving these markets forward.
Yeah, so I think before I get into the CDR piece specifically, there are a few pieces that we kind of touched on that need to be in place for projects to reach FID and need to be in place for advancement. You guys both touched on the carbon market specifically, the taxes specifically. Your developing country also needs the supportive policies, permitting, and regulations in place. There needs to be assurance that what is being done is going to be done safely and efficiently and effectively. When we talk about subsidies specifically, a lot of these countries are not going to have the same budgets that the UK has had and that the US has had, and even that Canada has, right? So when you look at the potential to include CDRs, which can have a higher value on the market system, to help finance those point source capture compliance based projects, you can see some things really advance. In Norway, the phase 2 of the Longship project has used a modular BEX process to fund the point source capture and then tap into that shared infrastructure. So we are seeing some projects go forward like that in Canada as well. That pipeline that I mentioned is currently at 10% capacity. It is from the heartland, so all the heavy emitters, but we are seeing some of the projects go ahead that might be able to get a higher value. Deep Sky operates in Alberta, testing different direct air capture facilities. I think we need some of the removals to advance from a technological perspective as well. But Alberta has actually signaled a way to use removals as a compliance offset on our credit market. And they've actually written that into the quantification protocols. The challenge that we're seeing is those removal credits at a higher value than the compliance credits. So there's some bumps to work out, but I do think there's significant support in Canada especially. We are the first country to have a direct air capture quantification protocol federally. And as we see more of that government support for removals and the role that they can play in helping finance point source, hopefully we can bring down that government subsidy potential cost, because a lot of places can't afford where we're at right now. We've talked about this.
Pavan, do you want to comment on this point? I mean, we're certainly seeing in the UK where looking at the role of voluntary carbon markets in terms of driving forward GGR projects. Is that looking at revenue stacking and a way to move this forward? Is that something that you're seeing?
So the bulk of the projects outside of Europe, I'm seeing the CBAM as a driver for that. The CBAM as a driver for that because in the projects in UAE, Algeria, Morocco, and Egypt, the CBAM is actually driving, but also we do see the demand for low carbon products is driving some of the projects in Qatar and Saudi. But when it comes to non-CBAM related projects, of course, voluntary carbon markets and buying from Microsoft is also driving, and that's predominantly for the industries that has biogenic CO2. For the industries that do not have a biogenic CO2, what we are seeing is also the demand from Norway, which have announced doubling the budget. And if you work it out, it's approximately on average $100 per euros, 100 euros per ton of CO2, which is a feasible amount for reduction in addition to the removals. And the recent announcement of 5% target by EU is also one of the driver for some of the projects in Global South. To address your question with regards to not having funding, it is indeed true that the funding reduces the net capex and improves the business case. But we've also seen that low cost loans is also an important way, and the infrastructure capital with infrastructure kind of returns, because these are infra projects that also has a significant impact on the business case. We often don't talk about it. We talk about the funding side, but the cost of capital has a huge impact on the business cases as well. And I think one of the things which international organizations can do is, can we actually fund the early stage projects with the, you don't have to give them the free loans, but at least the low cost loans that are repayable or convertible loans for subject to performance. Those are the really good way to kickstart some of the projects in global south, because the problem is there is a line of sight for the business business case, but how do you spend the feasibility study? How do you spend the feed, which costs up to 5 to 10 million, with no good insights into whether business case has a credible business case, yes or no. So even if the governments fund that early part, the markets can pick up the rest of the equation, because you have line of sight for the business cases, and that is what we are seeing in some parts of the world. There is a business case, but the projects are stuck at feasibility, having to justify the feasibility and pre-feed.
I just wanted to come back to technology, Johan, because you mentioned that technology is not really the barrier. You think the technology is there, and we are, it's the business models, it's the scaling up that is the challenge. However, we are, in terms of capture technologies, there is this gap between those that are able, how do you move from TRL 5.6 up to TRL 8.9 to be able to actually be deployed at scale, and for investors to be able to say that they're happy to invest in these technologies that are, not necessarily have the data and the proven ability behind them.
That's a really good question, and like one that we're actually grappling with at the minute, because that's exactly the space we're in terms of technology readiness level. I think the challenges in going through that is not unique to CCUS, right? Like in terms of deep tech, people used to call it the valley of death. I'm going to call it the valley of innovation, I guess. It is challenging, right? And I think for us, I can only speak to my experience here, but like for us, what's making it work is the emerging price signals like definitely makes the investment case easier, not easy, easier. When we look at government funding, typically there is still a huge need to justify why do we spend taxpayers' money on making this investment, right? And in a similar way that you would need to justify project spend, you do need to justify your development and project spend with the grant provider, which typically comes from taxpayers' money, right? So we do need to acknowledge that these are innovation projects and that there's significantly higher risk than investing in TRL9 infrastructure investment. But also, if we look at what that means for international nation PLC making that investment, helping to support that technology development, and actually in the long term exploiting that technology's IP from that territory, and what that means in terms of tax revenue, that whole package still does need to add up. And I think for businesses going from TRL 5.6 onwards, having non-dilutive funding from a government source, like number one, validates that somebody agrees with the approach you're taking and that your technology has been reviewed and approved for investment. But also there is the review on, does this investment for the territory making that investment, does it make sense in the long term? That funding's, it's available, but it's not just given out to everyone. It's highly competitive, and I think recently the CCSA published an article about what Europe's been investing in this space, and the UK is making some not in the short term, but in the longer term, making significant investment in our space as well. But it's allocating that investment to projects that in the long run would see an increase in competitiveness There's a lot of follow-up here, so I'm going to pass it over.
Yeah. Pavan, did you want to come in and then?
So I second what you just said. Technology is a good, is not a bottleneck. It's a good news story for us because we have developed 40 plus projects and we are looking at 60 plus technologies. And the technology is there for, and we can map the technology along the deployment curve. But having listened to Johan, I think it's indeed true that there is an opportunity to develop the technology and invest in it. And what the cement industry has done is rather than one company investing in a technology development or piloting, we've collaborated and partnered with other industries and shared the learnings. So that is what really helped us in the past. And of course, the companies are investing in the technology pilot platforms. For example, Holcim has invested in a test site in Matra where the technology providers can come in and then plug in and then test the technologies. Of course, we will not fund the cost associated with their building the technology, but we would provide, not we, Holcim would provide a site where the technologies can be tested in the live cement applications.
And I mean, that's great, but that's not all, that's not across the board, is it? But I think the more of that we could have, the better. There is time for questions just after Brian's spoken. If there are any questions, please raise your hand.
Okay, you guys covered most of it. I was going to say, as technologies are tested and validated, when they receive funding, it's important to tie those knowledge sharing opportunities with that funding so that the other industries can also learn. It's great to hear there's collaboration amongst the cement industry, but how can those lessons maybe apply to the steel industry or to the fertilizer sector? And how do we make sure that we're advancing all industries, especially when it comes to new technology development at the same time?
Thank you. I think I'll have to pass the mic.
Thank you. I'm Ashrit with Carbon Balls. Could you give some examples of CDR credit sort of accelerating CCUS, particularly in emerging economies? And how do you forecast if you were to like what sort of a percentage or like what sort of a role will CDR play in accelerating this tech in the future, 5-10 years from now?
If I understand correctly, the question was, what is the role of CDR is playing in Global South in accelerating the CCUS projects? Yes. So there are a couple of projects in Global South that we are currently supporting where voluntary markets and CDRs are the driver for the project scoping and execution. Because these particular countries, they do not have a carbon price. And in the absence of a carbon price, the cement price would have to be increased from 40 to 200, and there's no market for that net zero cement. So the entire revenue, bulk of the revenue is coming from the CDR's voluntary market. And of course, that particular client was lucky to be in a place where they have access to a deep water port. So they can ship a bit of net zero cement into Europe and monetize that. But predominantly the value is coming from the CDRs, from the voluntary carbon market. I work for a consulting firm, so I cannot really name names, but happy to provide more steer on that.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? If not, I think we'll just end with one question because we needed to wrap up. But if perhaps you can each go one by one and tell us what do you think is the biggest lesson that can be transferred either from the UK, Europe, or States to emerging markets and to develop and deploy the industry at scale? Is it business models, regulation, market drivers?
I think it has to be everything, which is hard. I do think there needs to be demand for low carbon products. If you don't have somebody to buy your cement that's green cement, you're not going to make it. You need to have the regulations in place so that the public can still accept the project and feel confident in the tax dollars that are going to be needed to support it. And you need to have incentives for industry to move forward from a compliance perspective. If you don't have all three of those things, I don't think you're going to see projects move ahead.
I think Brian has covered most of it, so I don't think I would like to repeat that. But I think what I've missed, what is a small addition to it, is access to the low-cost capital. In terms of, it should be infrastructure-related kind of returns, not first of the kind returns, and those would kickstart the work outside of EU.
So I don't want to repeat everything because I agree with everything that's just been said, but I think like cross-border harmonization on policy as well, I think is a really, really important topic, particularly in those emerging markets where, you know, perhaps one territory is doing one thing or like another territory has sequestration space. Like, how do we figure that out, right? Like, I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, and I think doing that at UK, European, inter-European stages, you know, and then globally is absolutely critical to enabling the market to really develop. Okay, we will bring that to a close. So if I can thank all our panelists, thank you very much to those of you who came as well. Great to see you here, and thank you for hosting us in this pavilion here.